Titane.
That's still in cinemas, so I haven't been able to see that yet because I've not been able to get to it because I got COVID at the start of the month. So
yeah. And thankfully you're fine now as well. Yeah, that's good.
So I had trouble getting to cinema. What were your thoughts on it?
I think this is one of those films where you kind of need to go into it like not knowing as much as possible. What really works about Titane is that it's absolutely an extreme example of that new French extremity cinema, stuff like Irreversible, stuff like Inside, the kind of film that is like very, very brutal and weird and quite intense. But I think what the film does excellently is that it has that, whilst it also combines it with a family drama quality about it. It sort of shifts from one to the other. It's really dark, it's really weird. It's made by a filmmaker who is definitely in full command of their craft. A beautifully shot film. It's a really wonderfully intense experience, especially if you see it in the cinema. The sound design is immaculate. What I think is most interesting about the film is all the stuff that you can read into it, all of the stuff about gender, sexuality, the body, family, and stuff like that. It's the kind of film that I think it just benefits analysis, but it's also a really intense experience as well. Being as vague as possible, that's why. It's a film that took me for a spin, and it threw in things that I wasn't expecting, but it also gave me a lot to think about. So that, on its basis alone, is why I'd say it's a really great film.
What's your third film?
The Power of the Dog. It's the kind of movie that you just don't typically see a lot of. Western drama about a very flawed guy's mental state and how he's dealing with it, and the way he treats people in the family situation, and this kind of destruction of family quality. Like it's tackling a lot of these interesting, complicated themes on this kind of big, grand Western canvas. And I found it to be a very effective dissection of a lot of this stuff. It's a good return to form for Jane Campion. She can shoot it well, but she can just effectively capture humanity in these gender constructs and how damaging they can be. I found it very unpredictable. I found it very complicated. And again, it had an ending that gave me a lot to think about. The horror genre in general last year was actually underwhelming.
I didn't watch a lot of horror films this year because I've not been interested in the genre particularly for a little while now.
Okay.
A lot of the horror films I've enjoyed, I've liked, are about maybe 10 years old minimum now. A couple here and there that have stood out to me, but a lot of them, I don't find a lot of horror films particularly frightening. I think that's why I like psychological horror so much, because it's not so much scary, it's unsettling. I think it's what I like about, like the old Hammer horrors, which you know I love. I think I'm a lot more about atmosphere than I am about scares. I think it's part of the reason that despite it's got the supernatural thing that I really, really hate, I mean, it still had a really good atmosphere, The Night House. I think that's why I don't hate the film, because a lot of horror is still reliant on that almost. A jump scare narrative, and the atmosphere is not specific enough. It doesn't create full dread to me. It creates hey, we're going to scare you here, get ready for it. And because of that, I feel like I've just not had the experience that I've wanted out of horror films for a long time. So I've not seen a lot of these.
I just feel like a lot of them just weren't as good as they wanted to be, or not as good as I thought they would be. They had like 3 standouts. So The Night House was definitely one of them. A Quiet Place 2 and Malignant were fairly good, but the other ones, a lot of them just made choices that just didn't work for me. Again, they didn't quite live up to the standard of quality that they wanted to. There are 2 films within this genre as well that I actually would put on like my least favorite films of last year: Don't Breathe 2 and Halloween Kills. I'll go into Don't Breathe 2 first. Don't Breathe was a really solid, smart home invasion film that was clever because it took the home invasion tropes that you're familiar with, a bunch of robbers breaking into a home and the occupant having to defend themselves or being taken hostage, and threw it on its head to be a story about a bunch of desperate thieves trying to break into an old blind man's home, even for like sympathetic reasons. And ultimately, it was revealed that they broke into the home of a rapist and a murderer, not only a really dangerous war veteran, but also a guy who had kidnapped a woman that had basically accidentally killed his daughter and like forcefully impregnated her to like give him another child. It was really fucked up, but it was really effective, and it was a really scary, intense movie. What Don't Breathe 2 did, unfortunately, was that it basically decided to take that very scary, threatening villain and turn him into a redeemable anti-hero. I saw some people online saying that this was a weird direction, and I want to just spin this off to talk about these two trends that I'm just so sick of, that I'm just so tired of. I'm so tired of movies doing the let's take a villain and make him an anti-hero. And I'm so tired of the whole grizzled hard ass being redeemed through protecting a kid. We've seen both of those cliches done so many times recently. Are you tired of those cliches?
Oh, that's defending a kid. Depends for me. If it's done well enough, I can go with it. But I am annoyed with, let's make this random villain an anti-hero without it having much narrative weight.
I was bothered by what this movie decided to do because, you know, in the first one, it committed to making his character pretty reprehensible. This film, on the other hand, tries to make him the lesser of the two evils. In particular, what really pissed me off was that the film seemingly hinted at maybe revealing that these robbers who are breaking into his home again were like maybe the good guys that were attempting to rescue this girl that he basically adopted. And I thought to myself, okay, it seems to be hinting in the direction that even if these guys aren't good, then they at least have justification. And maybe the blind man in this film is still a villain. But then the film turns it around and says, like, no, they were kidnapping her, so therefore they could like harvest her organs and stuff. And it was just so frustrating to watch them basically commit to this decision to make him justifiable in what he was doing. And the film even culminates in this incredibly like hideously sentimental ending. My jaw was on the ground. It felt almost like something that you do in like a parody and not in like a legitimate movie, especially with this character.
If you want a horror film to be effective, the villain can't be sympathetic. It becomes a kind of scary drama.
In this one, the point is that they're trying to retroactively do that with this villain that they had in the first one, and it just doesn't work. And no matter what they would have done, it just doesn't really work fundamentally. I'd almost like to say that it's as misguided as, say, coincidentally, Halloween relation, King Michael Myers, the brother of Laurie Strode. But I'd like to say that it's even closer to Texas Chainsaw 3D, how they tried to make Leatherface the wronged victim of like a mob. It's that same kind of idea of let's take this villain and let's have other people be worse than him and let's have him look good by comparison.
The problem is, it humanizes the villain and then they're less scary. I mean, theoretically, we should be able to be more scared of human evil than the abstract concept of evil. But in a horror film, that doesn't work because the whole point of horror is to tap into the primal element of you and get the scare. If you start adding sympathy, you start tapping into the head as well as the heart, which is where the primal is. And because you're then tapping into logic, it creates a different experience and one that doesn't work.
It's not even really done very intelligently because inherently it's just a really dumb idea. But like even the way that they do it again is so hoary. Like they even go so far as to give him a save the dog moment where he literally saves the dog from dying as a way to make us care more about him. But fundamentally from the beginning, anything that the movie's trying to do, I'm just like, this isn't how he was. Like he was a bad guy. Why are you doing this? And even as a film, for me personally, like Don't Breathe 2, even when you take that aside, it was very tedious in its pacing. It felt really slow. It did have its intense moments. It did have its visceral bits of violence, but it was way too slow paced. It was really, really dark and muddy. It was just not a nice movie to look at. And it just overall felt really cynical and manipulative. What I hate the most is when a film is really trying to manipulate you to care about something. I can't care about this as much as you're trying to make me care about it. And I don't like the fact that you're trying to make me care about it because I shouldn't really care about this. It almost felt like it's like the same mentality as somebody writing fan fiction where Ted Bundy ended up being a really, really nice guy or something like that. It's that same kind of mentality of like, let's humanize this evil character. It just left me so like annoyed that they thought that would work. Go watch Don't Breathe. It's really good. Ignore Don't Breathe 2. Terrible. To move on to Halloween Kills, this was a lot different because I really liked Halloween 2018. I found it to be quite a good follow-up to the original Halloween. But this sequel, despite having like the same creative team, behind it. It was just a mess, and I just found it to be really, really forced because it was very, very redundant. It just constantly talked about stuff that we had already seen and that had already happened. It felt so slow. It felt very padded. It felt really messy because it felt like there was a lot of stuff that was being done to fill time, and there wasn't a really coherent, clear narrative beyond Michael Myers is back and he's killing people again, and people want to stop him. And it's just a whole bunch of different disparate threads. It just doesn't feel like a very coherent movie. It was also just kind of so overall uneventful that when I was watching it, I got to like half an hour before the end and I was like, wait, there's like half an hour left? Because the entire thing just felt like one long extended second act. And it speaks to what I feel was another thing that I'm getting tired of as well, is of these movies that don't know how to do the part two of a trilogy correctly. Making part two in a trilogy can be done really, really well, but there are a lot of films that use that as an excuse to basically just make a bunch of filler, or make it just be a bridge film, in between movies.
Which it would
Really
be
bothered me.
fundamentally anyway if you just told the right story through it in the first place, because it should continue the arc, which will let it bridge. But the problem is, I think what you're touching on is that a lot of films now are just a bridge, and they forget that no, this story still has to be just as good on its own as well.
Yeah, and obviously it's not just common with like trilogies in particular. Like a lot of films that have like a specific story arc, they'll then end up having something that at the end of the day again does just feel like a connective tissue. But there are films that do that well and films that don't do it well. And the ones that don't do it well are the ones that don't really feel like movies. They just feel like, okay, let's establish this stuff, or even worse, just let's have a bunch of filler that's there just to kill time in between films. Halloween Kills felt completely like that. There were a lot of good individual scenes in the movie, and there was certainly a lot of scenes that if you just looked at them on their own, or even a few of them spliced together, they would seem like they were from a really good movie. But when you join them up together, it just doesn't really work. It did have some good moments of violence. It was sometimes intense. The direction and acting weren't bad. The score was really good. But I think just on a script level, it was totally hobbled. Like there was a part of me that was kind of okay with them doing a continuation of Halloween 2018, just because that film did end a little bit abruptly. But upon reflection, it almost feels like it would have been a bit better if they just left it there. I don't know. Halloween Ends is coming out this year. I'll still watch it. Maybe it will make this trilogy worth it. But for me personally, Halloween Kills was a big disappointment. It also just wasted opportunity for like good social commentary as well. But I could probably do like a separate video on that. So didn't like those two at all.